What's it like living as a female expatriate in Asia? Will I be lonely if I move to Asia? Will I be able to make friends easily? Is it financially viable for me to retire in Asia? What are some of the things that I'll miss if I'm not living at home? And will I ever be able to date again? Well, if any of those questions or some other kind of topics about being a female expat in Asia have ever occurred to you, congratulations, you are in the right spot. My name is Wendy, and for more than 3 decades, I have lived and worked in 5 different countries in Asia, and I still, obviously, live in Asia, and I still work here too. And today I'm walking my dog, so if I have to suddenly dash off because she's chasing squirrels, I apologize for that. So I wanted to talk today about an interesting topic that affects many of us who are long-term expats. When I first moved to Asia, which was right at the end of the 80s, a long, long time ago, I would meet people like me, people who'd been away for 15 years, 20 years, or even longer. And I think to myself, what's wrong with these people? Why are they still living in Asia? Why won't they go home? And it's a fair question, you know. It brings up a couple of topics. Firstly, what is home and what does that mean? And secondly, can we ever go back? And so here I am, more than 3 decades later, still living in Southeast Asia. And yes, I have had periods where I've gone home and settled at home, but I keep getting drawn back. And a strange thing sort of happens to you after a period of time when you are an expat. You start to feel like you don't quite belong. You don't belong maybe at home where everybody else has stayed and settled. And none of this is a judgment, you know, it's just a different way to live. So for me, if I go back and catch up with old friends, if I start talking about, you know, my holiday or, something about my lifestyle, I can just see that there's no real connection because my lifestyle is different in so many ways, or my experiences are different in so many ways that it's hard to relate to me. And at the same time, if they're talking about, you know, the things that they do, which is go to the local hardware store every weekend or worry about their house renovation, something like that, I also find it hard to relate to that. I actually once had an in-law say to me one time, "Why do you stay so far away? Don't you miss your school friends?" And yeah, it's not that you don't miss people from home, but hanging around with my school friends when I'm in my 40s just wasn't something that I was into and had no experience of. So expat communities, you know, are pretty strong. Usually they're pretty welcoming. You'll always find someone from your tribe eventually. It might take some time. But I didn't have this overwhelming need to stay still, particularly after I'd been away for a little while and my feet weren't as planted in the land. Now, to be fair, I'm actually from New Zealand originally, although I sound Australian, so I've actually been moving around since I was a child. My family immigrated when I was young. So maybe I never really had that kind of concrete sense of staying in one place in the first place. That would be fair. But this happens to a lot of expats. A lot of expats find that when they travel overseas and they've been away for a long, long time, this idea of settling somewhere becomes quite difficult. We do talk a lot in the expat community about third culture kids. These are kids who are born in, let's say, like my kids were born in Asia, and their first real experience of living in their home country, in their case Australia, might be, you know, when they go to university or, you know, something like that. So they are like permanently discombobulated, but the community that they have is that third culture. They're not alone. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids who have grown up not fully in one camp and not fully in another camp. They're in a third camp. They're the third culture kids. And I think the same thing happens to adults after a certain period of time. You know, my communities are expatriate communities. The people that I relate to best are the people who've lived in different countries. And it might not just be Asia, it might be they've lived in the Middle East, or they've lived in, you know, other parts, New Guinea, or, you know, somewhere away from where most Western, and now I'm talking about Western, but most Western people have lived. And so they're a bit discombobulated as well. So we get together and we share war stories. I'm just greeting a friend of mine on the beach. And we share war stories about that kind of thing. And it's fun. You know, it's fun. We've all got interesting experiences. We discover that, you know, in this country, this thing was illegal, and in that country, it wasn't illegal, or how it was to have a baby in some random place. We've got these stories that we can only share with each other, because if we go home and try and share it with the people who, you know, have not experienced that lifestyle, they just have no connection to it. It sounds really odd. You know, in Asia, one of the advantages, I'm going to say, is that you might get more readily affordable domestic help than you would in other countries. And I remember when one of my kids, my daughter, was quite young, and we'd gone home on home leave, they call it home leave, and we were at a supermarket buying things, and my daughter, who would have then been about 7 or 6 or 7, she made reference to our helper. That's a sort of polite way of saying maid if you're in Hong Kong, a helper, Filipino helper. And the lady behind the cashier, she sort of gave me a funny look about this helper, and then my daughter was like, the maid. Now in Australia, having a maid, if you're not really really rich, is unusual. In Asia, it is not unusual, okay? It is not such an unusual thing due to socio-economic reasons and all kinds of reasons, traditions and whatever. So this kind of thing sets you apart, and it can be uncomfortable for some people when they go home. So they just don't go home. They stay where they feel safe. They stay where they can connect to other people who aren't going to think it's weird that you spent, 4 years living in an encampment in the middle of Kuwait just after the war. Your experiences aren't seen as unusual. They're seen as par for the course because they're expats and you're expats. And that becomes your new community. This becomes your tribe. This is your sisterhood. These are the people who get you, and they're not going to judge you. And that's what happens. It takes a little while. You suddenly realize one day that when you go home, you're not sure where you belong. You don't know where home is. And so you kind of stick with the people who feel most comfortable to you. And those people are going to be other expats. So decades passed, and here you still are. And maybe you think to yourself, well, I've lived here this long now, may as well retire here. There's no particular reason for me to go home and be in my home country and do old age in another place where I don't really have strong connections and I don't know people as well as I thought. I'll just stick where I am. That happens to so many people, especially where I live now and other places in Asia where there's a lot of retirees. Quite often you start to speak to them and they would have spent, 20 years in the Middle East or somewhere else or Asia or even Latin America, and they've come to a place and they think, here's my tribe, here's the other expats, and they all hang out together. I hope that sort of answers any questions as to why some people never go home, because the truth is, for gypsies like us, our home is where we are. Our home is with our people, and our people are other expats like us who are just doing their thing. They've kind of jumped a few steps when it comes to settling down. They've never quite fully embraced that idea. They still like to have unusual surprises, which keeps everything a little bit fresh, and we're okay with it. We've gotten used to it. This is our home now. So I hope that helps, and I hope you have yourself a lovely day. If you want to find out more about what it's like to date as a female expat, or how expats in Asia, expat women in Asia feel about those much older guys with the much younger girlfriends, don't forget to click on one of the other videos, and make sure you like and subscribe, because that really helps the algorithm. Hope you have a lovely day. I'll show you the sunrise. Da, da. Have a good one. Bye.